Good day, we are Team Webinars from Bped 3B, and today we are going to present our research study. Our team. These are the persons behind this research. Bautista Beiruz, Causo Lorien Joy, De La Cruz Justin Dave, De La Cruz Patricia, Osmeña Daryl James, Ramos Max Edward, San Diego Jan Eldridge, Sanggalang Charing May, and Vistro Christopher. And to our respected panelists, good day to all of you. This is the title of the research that we are going to present to you. Webinars on Physical Education Curriculum Standards in the Philippines in the New Normal, Implications to Teaching and Learning. This presentation contains the following. Number 1, the suggestions of the panels on the previous proposal, presentation of the data. The next is the conclusion, and last is the recommendations.
According to the panelists, we don't have to change the SOP number 1 because they have seen no mistake on it and it has to be as it should. So we remain still on having that first SOP. The panel suggested that we need to modify our scope and the limitation. So we followed their instructions to include there that we need at least one webinar per region in every state university colleges in the Philippines. But it has to be aligned in field of physical education. So I'm not going to bother with SOP 1. I saw the overview and the teaser for chapter 1 and 2. It's correct that they categorize the webinars, and then the second one, what I noticed is that their presentation has a table. Then in the first column, for example, one is category. And in the second column, one with the problem that the webinar seeks to answer. Because what I'm thinking is that if number 2, there will be no serious discussion or consequences for the webinar. It's like, what's the point of categorizing and recognizing the webinars? And that's what I'm thinking about. So I went back to their aim and looked for the importance. And when they found the webinars, what did they do? In the new normal, ma'am, I'd like to respond to address the difficulties of those webinars. As a result, nothing will change in SOP number 2. If Sir Chris and Ma'am Gemma agree, yes, ma'am, so far in the application has been established as well as what is the mother's address of the webinar.
Data collection and data mining are two separate processes. What's the difference here? Is it really just replicated here? What's the difference here? They have a research and collection procedure. So, if it's data collecting, put it here. If it's data mining, put it here. So, that's alright. So, that's where the descriptive and data analysis ended up. Depending on how you present your data, you will place here the statistical statements or statistical tools that you will use, such as weighted mean, frequency count, and percentage. So that's what you put in the statistical analysis of data, descriptive research, and the study design. So all you have to do is switch positions. I believe it is taken into account. The scripts is okay, so that's all for study methods.
So the panelists suggested that we need to change our data analysis because we have put the descriptive research here. So we followed their instructions that will be included in the data analysis are the statistical treatments or tools that will be used such as weighted mean, frequency count, percentage. So depending on the presentation of the data. Also in SOP number 2, we followed the instructions that our presentation in SOP number 2 has a table. And In first column of the table, we will put here what the category, and in the second column, what's the problem that the webinars try to address. So they see there is no mistaken and nothing will change in SOP number 2 and also in SOP number 3. So they suggest what to do in the presentation.
So here are the description and categorization of the conducted physical education webinars from the Philippine State University colleges per region. Number 1. From the University of Northern Philippines, the webinars entitled Physical and Mental Health Issues, it lies under the categories of physical education. Number 2. From the College of Isabela State University, the webinar entitled Sport, Webinar on Risk Management on Sports, Intramurals, and it lies under the Sports Education. And number 3, from the College of Nueva Ecija University of Science and Technology, the webinars entitled Sports Education Rising Beyond the Pandemic, and it lies under the Sports Education. Number 4, in the Southern Luzon State University, this webinar is entitled of the International Webinar on Nano Techno Sports, and it lies under the Sports Education. And from the Palawan State University, the webinar entitled the Physical Education Teachers Engaging in a New Normal Teaching, and it lies on the instructional modality. And from the Bicol State University, the webinars entitled Professional Preparation Webinars on Sports, Coaching, Fitness and Management, and it lies under the Sports Education. And number 6, Aklan State University, the webinars entitled Sports, Coaching Amid COVID-19 Pandemic, and it lies under the Sports Education. And number 7, Cebu Normal University, the webinars entitled Organization Management and Leadership in Physical Education and Sports. It lies under the Physical Education and Sports. And number 8, the Eastern Samar State University, the webinars entitled Update and Conceptualization on Bped Tertiary Curriculum in Teaching Physical Education Courses, and it lies under the instructional modality. And number 9 is from the University of Southern Mindanao, the webinars entitled International Webinar on Physical Education, Sports Science, and Fitness for Better Normal. And number 10, from the Mindanao State University, the webinars entitled Webinar on Innovative Flexible Teaching and Learning Modalities for Physical Education and Health. It lies under the instructional modality. And 11, from the University of the Philippines, Mindanao, and the webinars entitled Sports Enhanced Webinar, Scaleometric Approach for Sports Performance Enhancement and Injury Prevention. And number 12, from the Mindanao State University, General Santos, the webinars entitled Webinars on the New Perspective in Sports, Physical Education and Recreation Amidst COVID-19 Pandemic, and of course, it lies under the Physical Education. And last, from the College of Northeastern Mindanao State University, the webinars entitled Webinar Series on Looking After Our Mental Health COVID-19, and it lies under the Health Education.
Here is the second table of the gathered data, which is about the difficulties and challenges of online physical education classes addressed in the webinars. These problems and difficulties are according also to the chronological order of the first table and are as follows. The first webinar, Preventing Injuries in Sports Events and Improving Skills in Sports. The next one, Organizing Sports Event and Sports Education in New Normal. The next one is Various Ways Technology Has Improved Sports Training. The next one, Challenges of Physical Education Teachers in Teaching Physical Education in a New Normal. The next one is instilling moral character of athletes in sports, and importing leadership and coaching skills. The next one is coach training programs, adjustments on physical activities during ECQ or GCQ, and tips for coaching and suggest strategies. The next one is development of critical and analytical abilities and the application of theory into practice so students will assume positions of leadership within the profession. The next one is implementation of policies in physical education of tertiary teachers. The next one, promoting sports science and research with special attention to physical education, sports science, and fitness. The next one, adjustments and challenges those teachers and students encountered in sports and physical education and recreation. The next one is improve the training of athletes, prevent injuries in sports and physical activities, and provide a learning environment to students and practitioners. The next one is applied principles in times of crisis in teaching physical education and practices for remote education. And for the last one is managing stress and engaging in physical activities to maintain mental health during COVID-19.
And now, here is the table wherein it gives answer for the statement of the problem number 3. That is about implications of those webinars into teaching and learning. The first webinar is physical and mental health issues. This webinar discussed one of the factors as to why some students stop studying in the new normal. Next is sports webinar on risk management on sports intramurals. This webinar discussed the clear guidance on how to optimize safe and widespread participation in sports. Next is sports education, rising beyond the pandemic. This webinar discussed sports e-learning platforms can help athletes excel in their sports. Next is international webinar on nanotechno sports. This webinar examined and improved their students' physical skills. Next is physical education teachers engaging in a new normal teaching. This webinar prioritizing the effective of quality instruction in physical education. Next is professional preparation, webinar on sports coaching, fitness, and management. This webinar implied insight on risk management and its application beyond just safe sports training and abuse prevention. Next is sports coaching amid COVID-19 pandemic. This webinar pursuing the players to have daily training amidst pandemic. Next is organization management and leadership in physical education and sports. This webinar explains what is needed to do and avoid accidents in sports events. Next is updates and conceptualization on PAT fit tertiary curriculum in teaching physical educational courses. This webinar physical education instructors, school administrators, and other health professionals must educate decision makers and policy makers about the value of physical education. Next is international webinar on physical education, sports science, and fitness for better normal. This webinar teaches video discussion and online instructions on how sports are doing will be a great way for students to learn. Next is webinar on innovative flexible teaching and learning modalities for physical education and health. This webinar teachers should determine the content, pedagogy, and assessment. Next is sports enhancements webinar, a scalometric approach for sports performance enhancement and injury prevention. This webinar is preparing for change the future of sports. Next is webinar on new perspectives in sports, physical education, and recreation amidst COVID-19 pandemic. This webinar teaching and learning design and the principles that be applied in times of crisis was implemented by the institution. And for the last is webinar series on looking after our mental health during COVID-19. This webinar can be implemented to help the students to manage their stress and engage them in physical activities. And that's all for the table number 3.
And here is the conclusion of our study. Coupled with the fact that physical education is the main topic of the webinars gathered by the researchers from every state university college in the Philippines. It has been concluded that almost all of the developments, the improvements, and adjustments are basically centered on sports, followed by the changes to instructional modalities in either teaching or learning. On the other hand, attributed to the fact that health education is part of physical education. There is also a low percentage of webinars about it. In addition, compared to the identified problems and current difficulties faced by the teachers, students, and the students athletes now that we are in the new normal caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, whether in implementation or initiative solutions to that problem to apply well in the development of curriculum standards in the Philippines education system.
However, it is the same with the focus on the development of sports and how it can be applied to education, and the changes in teaching and learning in the online setups of classes, and in the introduction of limited face-to-face classes in those schools in the Philippines. So, those schools that are no longer affected by the pandemic. And as a result, based on the summary of the findings of this study, it can be concluded that in the Philippines, webinars on physical education place little emphasis or not given the proper attention to the mental or physical health of students. Instead, they are focusing on improving the curriculum standards of teaching and learning environments and the development of sports in education.
Based on the summary of the findings and conclusions of the study, the researchers arrived at the following recommendations. First, to the students, participate and be active on joining webinars, especially on physical education, that concern with adapting on the new ways of learning physical education in the new normal setup of classes. Transparency and adaptivity on sports and health education as well. Second, to the PE teachers, adapt with the new means of teaching mechanisms. Be a digitally literate individual who knows the trends in education. Examine their technology experiences and expertise. Identify their strong points and weak points with the level of technology knowledge and skills they acquired. And explore what technology preparation was required for them to be prepared on integrating technology in their physical education students. Third, to the educational institutions, conduct many programs and webinars or so seminars if given a chance that will address all of the problems and difficulties that have been addressed from this chapter. Additionally, disseminating those implications to the new normal context of education that the researchers identified. Fourth, to the future researchers, for further research, researchers set forth the idea to conduct follow-up studies that will uplift and vitalize the progression and exploitative development with improvement of the study on hand.